Hey everybody, welcome back to homerecordingmadeeasy.com and here on my YouTube channel. And this time out, we're going to start to take a look at the FET channel in PreSonus Studio One, the FET channel XT. And we're going to start to look at, over the next series of videos, the different compressors that come with the FET channel XT and the ones that come for free, and then also the paid options, and or if you are a PreSonus Sphere member, all of these come included for free anyway. But one of the questions that I have gotten in the past from people who are just learning how to mix and especially how to use compression is they say, well, do we really need all these great compressors that PreSonus offers? Because we have the standard stock compressor up here. How does that really sound any different than, say, the one that I have here? This week, we're going to take a look at the FET comp, the 1176 emulation, and try to maybe point out to some of our beginners that are still learning to listen for compression, how to hear compression, what the differences are, and that it's not just hype, and all these compressors have a different sound to them. So we're going to compare our stock compressor to our 1176 emulation this week, and hopefully give you guys a little bit of ear training. But before we get to that, if you like what you see in this video, please hit that subscribe button. And if it's your first time here and you are a Studio One user, because we're talking about Studio One this week, I want you to head out to homerecordingmadeeasy.com. I have a ton of training that is perfect for beginners that are new to Studio One. You'll see an image come up on the screen. Make sure you check that out. And if you stick around to the end of the video, I'm going to give you a discount on some of those courses if you really want to dive down deep and learn about Studio One and learn a little bit more in detail about some of the things that we're talking about this week. So let's jump on in here into Studio One. So we have two compressors here. So the FET channel, XT that comes with, as I said, Studio One Professional, you get the FET channel XT. Even Studio One Artist, you get the FET channel XT. However, if you're not a PreSonus Sphere member, the free compressors that come with the FET channel here, if we look here, is we have a couple of different compressors that come with this. We have their standard compressor down here. That's a free one that you'll all have. We have the tube comp, which is the LA2A emulation. We'll talk about that in another video. And then we have our FET comp here, the 1176 emulation. All the other ones that you see here, the brick comp, the classic comp, the comp 160, the Everest, the Fairchild 670, the RC500, the tube, and the VT1 comp, all of those are add-ons that you can purchase at the PreSonus shop. However, if you are a PreSonus Sphere member, all of these come for free as part of your either monthly or annual membership, and they all have different flavors. And I'm going to try to hopefully be able to demonstrate that to you over the next couple of weeks. So let's compare the sound of these two compressors. So what I have here is I just have a simple little drum beat here. That's completely unmixed, no EQ, no compression, coming down to a drum bus. And on that drum bus, I have two instances of the FET channel. The first instance I have is the regular standard old compressor that comes with the FET channel. And then the second instance, I have our 1176. They're both in bypass mode. So right now, this is what our drum beat kind of sounds like with no compression, just so you can hear what we're kind of dealing with. And then we'll walk through our kind of test and I'll show you what we're going to do. So here's our drum loop, if you will, of what we're going to be listening to. Okay, you get the idea. Okay, so let's start with our stock compressor. So our standard old stock, great old compressor here from PreSonus in Studio One is exactly what it says it is. It's a compressor, okay? It has all the usual settings and suspects that you would see on most compressors. Every compressor is going to have some different settings depending on the compressor itself. But this one will have a threshold over here at the top left-hand corner, a ratio, a knee setting, a graphic display of what's going on here with the gain reduction meter. It'll have an attack and a release here. It'll have a gain section, a makeup gain section, or an auto gain section. It'll also have a side chain here, and then it'll have a wet dry knob for either you can do like a parallel compression kind of a thing, which we'll talk about in other videos. For now, we're going to leave it on 100%. Wet, which means all we're hearing that comes through this compressor is the compressed signal. So what does a compressor do? In general terms, a compressor controls dynamic range, right? So every piece of audio has a low point and a high point, okay? And from the lowest point to the highest point, the distance in between these 2 points is called dynamic range. What a compressor will do is as you use a compressor, it will squeeze the audio. The top will come down, the loudest parts will go down, and the quietest parts will come up. Okay, that's an exaggeration. The more you compress, if you start here with no compression, the more you compress, the more of this squeezing dynamic you're going to get, which means the quieter parts are going to get a little louder and the louder parts are going to get a little bit quieter to even out the performance. That's a general term. Again, for our beginners, that's all you need to worry about. Don't think about past that at this point in time. So what a compressor does is it controls dynamic range. Now, the stock compressor will do just that. It controls dynamic range. It is what we call a very transparent compressor, meaning that it doesn't really add any color. It doesn't add any tonal shift. It doesn't really change the EQ curve at all. It just does exactly what we just said. It just squeezes the audio depending on how aggressive you get, and it controls dynamic range. That's all it does. Okay. When you start to get into some different types of compressors, in our case here, the FET comp, which is a model and emulation that is done, was done by PreSonus on an 1176 compressor. That compressor is going to have some different controls on it, but more importantly, it's going to have a little bit of a different tone to it. Whenever you see these analog pieces of classic gear, like the 1176, like the LA2A, and some of the other ones that we're going to be talking about in future videos, all of those compressors do exactly what the standard stock compressor does. It compresses audio and controls dynamic range. The added benefit to some of these additional types of analog pieces of gear is that it also will imprint kind of a different sonic characteristic. It will change the tone of the audio in a very subtle way, and in a lot of cases, a very pleasing way. Okay, and I want to demonstrate that here today. Every compressor is going to sound a little bit different. But the great thing about what Studio One has done, or what PreSonus has done, especially if you have all these compressors, or if you're a Sphere member and you have all these as part of your package for free, as part of your membership, is you have all these different flavors of compressors. Okay, some people, you may have heard people say on YouTube, and even good old Uncle Dave here from time to time, we call these tone boxes, right? Every compressor is a tone box. What that means is it's going to change the way the compressor sounds from an EQ perspective. So I'm going to demonstrate that. So let's start with our stock compressor. This 1176 is in bypass mode. Okay, what I've done here, this is not going to be a real long lesson on how to use a compressor and get really down deep. If you really want to learn that, I urge you to go out to my website, homerecordingmadeeasy.com, and take the course Compression Made Easy. Compression Made Easy will change the way you think about compression. It'll take what I'm giving you here and go into a lot more detail in a very non-technical way. And by the time you're done with that course, you will never think about compression the same way again. And I mean that in a good way. Okay, Compression Made Easy. Again, stick around till the end of the video. You'll get a discount coupon code. So we're not going to talk about every little facet of how the compressor works. Just know that I've done a 4:1 ratio, which is a mild amount of compression. And we did a slow attack because we're working on drums, and a fast release. Okay, so we're not going to squash it. And we're going to try to achieve down here in the gain reduction meter about 3 to 4 dB of compression. So let me play this back and let's unbypass this and let's see what we have. About 3.5. You can see right down here where my cursor is 3.64. It varies a little bit, right? The snare is going to give you a little bit more compression because it's a little bit more spiky. You'll also see a little bit of an orange or an amber LED bar that comes down over here. That's the gain reduction meter. It's a little difficult to see on this plugin. It's better if you just look at the readout. So it's a pretty typical setting for a drum bus, okay? Not a lot of compression going on there. Now what I'm going to do is I want you to listen for, in particular, try to focus on the snare, because that's where it becomes most obvious. Listen to when I bypass and when I turn the plugin on and off. Do you hear any change in the tone of the snare? You're not going to really hear any change in volume because I've level matched our plugin so we can hear the before and after at the same volume, which is important. We'll talk about that in other videos. But I want to focus on the tone. Okay, so listen when I go back and forth. And if you want to play along with me, close your eyes and don't look at it when I go back and forth. See if you can hear me switching between turning the compressor on and turning the compressor off. Do you hear any difference? Let's try. Here we go. Here's with it on, and I'll turn it on and off, on and off, on and off. Okay, did you hear the difference between on and off, on and off? If you didn't, don't worry. Most people that are learning to use compression don't know how to listen for it. This is part of what I want to try to teach you today. When the compressor is in bypass mode, you'll hear a little bit more of a crack. This is why I told you focus on the snare. A little bit more of the stick hit, the initial transient of the snare. You'll hear that crack, a little bit heavier, pokes out a little bit more at you. When I turn the compressor off, that's when it's in bypass mode. A little bit more snare is going to come through. When I turn the compressor on, you're still going to have a lot of snare, but you're going to hear that that attack is a little bit less aggressive. Okay, so now I want you to watch the compressor. Don't close your eyes this time. Listen to when I have it on, and when I turn it off, listen for the actual crack of the snare. Try to not focus on anything else. Okay, can you hear how the snare is a little bit more tamed when I use the compressor? It doesn't really, nothing else really changes. All we really hear is the crack of the snare gets a little bit more subtle. It's not so pokey, okay? Now, if you can't hear that difference at the end of the video, or stop the video now, rewind it and listen to that example again. If you can't hear the difference, right on. You're on your way to learning how to hear compression, which is huge and the hardest thing for beginners to learn how to do, okay? So if you can hear that subtlety that I just described and you can truly hear the difference, you're on your way, okay? If you can't, go back, rewind until you can. Focus on it, close your eyes, you'll be able to hear the difference. It is fairly subtle, by the way, okay? But outside of that snare hit, outside of that, do we hear anything else when I go on, off, on, off, on, off that changes? Does anything else really change? Let's hear it. Not really, does it? The only thing you really hear is the snare getting a little bit softer now that I pointed it out to you. But overall, the tone of the drums is the same. Sounds great. There's nothing wrong with it. This is because a stock plugin such as this is a great utility tool when you want something that we call transparent. It means we don't want to add any color. We don't want to add any grit. We don't want it to really change the tonality of it in any way. All we wanted to do was compress and tame that transient or that snare in this particular example. That's one use, okay? But what's the difference now if we did the same kind of test on an 1176 style compressor? Does it sound any different? I don't know. Okay, now the controls are a little bit different on an 1176. We still have our ratio. We're going to do a 4:1 ratio. We're still going to do a slow attack and a fast release. And those attack times are going to be a little different, and those release times are going to be a little different than what's in the stock compressor, okay? We're going to have an input, which means the more we push the input, the more signal we push into the compressor, and it's going to get louder. And then we have an output to compensate and level match it. So, pardon me, before and after, bypassed, unbypassed is the same volume level. We're going to look at our meter here, and we're going to achieve about the same amount of compression. Okay, this is not an exact science. It's not about, is it exactly the same amount of compression? It's going to be close enough. What I'm trying to teach you is to listen for the tone. So anyway, here's without the compressor, the 1176, and then we'll turn it on and let's see if we can hear any difference. Okay, do you hear any difference? Now let's go back to our example about listening for that snare. Let's listen for that snare drum again. Okay, let's listen for that attack, the crack of the snare. What changes? How does it change? Does it sound any different than the crack of the snare, the transient when we were listening to the stock compressor? I don't know, let's try. Here's with the compression, I'll take it away, go back and forth, focus on the snare. it has that same kind of dynamic, doesn't it? Where you can hear with the compressor engaged that the transient gets a little shaved off at the top. It's a little bit more controlled. It doesn't poke out as much. Those odd hits don't come through the mix as much. It's a little bit more tame, but it still sounds pretty aggressive, doesn't it? Okay, so it's doing the same thing as the other compressor. It's kind of compressing those transients. However, do we hear anything else? Do we hear anything else that's different about this? Or is it just the snare? Does everything else seem almost exactly the same? Let's listen. Now, what I want you to listen for, if you're someone that's new to this, I want you to listen for what perceives to be reverb, actually the sound of the room. It's the sound of the room mics and the overhead mics. I want you to listen to, does it sound like there's a little bit more natural reverb? Does there sound like the kit has a little bit more energy than it does with or without the compressor? I don't know. Let's listen. Here's with it, and then I'll take it away. Okay, do you hear the difference? Now you may say, boy, that's so close, Dave, it's really hard to tell. If you're someone that's new to listening for this stuff, it may seem like that's a pretty subtle change. For my students that are watching this, that have experience with listening for this, that have their ears tuned to this, you would know that that is a massive difference between before and after. Okay, so what do we hear? We hear that it sounds like, like I said, there's a little bit more energy, a little bit more room. It sounds like the drum kit gets a little bit wider. It has a little bit more, I wouldn't say distortion is the wrong word, but a little bit more grit. It feels like it's a little bit more crispy. It's a little bit more energetic, okay, with the compressor than without the compressor. It doesn't really get any louder, but it changes the way the EQ is slightly. It sounds like it has a little bit of a different EQ to it and a little bit more room sound in it. Okay, that's what it sounds like to me, where on the stock compressor, it was almost indistinguishable between on and off, on and off, on and off. Okay, let's listen to that again. So here is without that 1176. I'll bring it in. Listen for those some of those things that some of those characteristics that I just mentioned. It's bigger. A little bit more in your face, right? It kind of seems like it pulls the drums a little bit more forward to you. It feels like it's just more aggressive, right? So why is that, you might be asking? Well, why with about the same amount of compression and about the same settings and the same attack and release time for the most part? Again, it can never be exactly one-to-one because the controls are all a little bit different and the specs are all a little bit different, but it's really close. But why is there that difference? The reason for that is because whenever you have an analog piece of equipment like this, an 1176 that was modeled to sound like an old piece of analog gear, inside of that analog gear, things that they've modeled are things like, in some cases, transformers, capacitors, resistors. Some compressors will have tubes in them. There's different circuitry in there. And when you run your audio through that circuitry, it imparts a little bit of a different tonality, a little bit of an EQ shift, a little bit more what we call harmonic distortion, or a little bit of crispiness to the signal. That is inherent with analog gear. That's one of the things that people love about analog equipment, is because when you run digital audio through it, it gives it a pleasing sound, a more comfortable, familiar sound. And when they modeled that piece of gear in the plug-in format, you get some of those characteristics. On something like the regular old standard stock compressor, all that is, it's not modeling anything. It's not modeling any kind of old analog gear, analog internal circuitry or anything like that. It is just doing one thing and one thing only. It is just compressing the audio depending on the way that you set it. That's all it's really intended to do. But the nice thing about having different kinds of compressors, and you'll learn this over the next several weeks, is every one of these compressors sounds just a little bit different. And depending on the program material and the song and the track and what you like to hear, you will learn, once you learn how to hear compression, you'll have different tools in your toolbox. And maybe one source of audio sounds great with an 1176, or in our case here, the FET comp. And maybe another piece of audio sounds good with the tube comp or the LA2A, right? Or maybe you want something so pristine and crystal clear, you don't want any kind of color, any kind of distortion, any kind of anything on that signal. And then maybe something like the stock compressors for you because you want it to be completely transparent so we don't hear the artifacts at all. That's why having multiple compressors could be very helpful and give you more tonal options when you're mixing. So now we'll finish up this video quickly here. Let's just cycle back and forth. Let's start with the stock compressor, then I'll turn that off and go to the 1176 and see again if you could hear the difference between the two. Here's the stock compressor. Okay, so again, if you can't hear the difference between those two compressors, stop the video, rewind it, and listen again. The more you kind of do these ear training exercises, the better you'll get. And if you go check out, as I said, Compression Made Easy on the website, we'll do lots of this with lots of different compressors so you can really hear back and forth what the difference is. If you're someone who's new to mixing, someone who's new to compression, compression is the #1 thing and the most difficult thing for someone new to this stuff, to beginners, to hear. And the reason why is because there is a lot of subtleties and it just takes time to tune your ears. And I'm hoping over the next 6 or 7 weeks, as we compare our stock compressor to different types of compressors that are offered in the FAT channel, you'll start to hear the differences and start to understand, oh wow, the tonal possibilities are there. I may want to have a couple of these in my collection if I don't already have them. The one great thing about Studio One is they have them all built right in. You don't have to go out and buy any other third-party plugins, especially if you're a PreSonus Sphere member. So I hope you enjoyed this little intro to compression between the FET comp and the stock compressor here by PreSonus. Thank you so very much for watching. Now, like I said at the beginning of the video, I want to give you something for free to help you out. So as I said, if you really want to learn more about this whole thing called compression and you really want to finally get, if you're struggling to hear it and you don't really understand and you really want to know more about it and you really want to learn it in a non-technical way, I highly suggest you check out my course, Compression Made Easy, on my website. And I want to give you a 25% discount if you want to check out that course. Just use the coupon code YouTube25. It'll take 25% off Compression Made Easy or any other course that's on my website. And if you're a Studio One user, I have several courses that are designed to do specific Studio One training. So if you really want to learn the ins and outs of Studio One, I have courses for those as well. You can check that out and you can use that coupon code. Okay, so let me know in the comments below if you use any of the FAT channel plugins, if you're a Studio One user, if you have several of them, what is your favorite? And then also let me know, did you hear the difference here in the demonstration? If you didn't hear the difference, it's okay. If you're new to hearing it and you're struggling a little bit, it's okay. We all struggled at this at first. Practice makes perfect. And the more times you listen to this stuff and you have somebody like myself, Uncle Dave here, coaching you through it, the better you'll get. And trust me when I tell you, one day you will have what I call the aha moment, where you'll hear the actual compression for the first time. You'll go, ah, now I know what to listen for. And when that happens, trust me when I tell you, my friend, your whole outlook on compression and how to use it in a mix will completely change in a positive way. So until the next video, I've been Dave with HomeRecordingMadeEasy.com. Thank you so very much for watching, and I'll see you guys very soon. Take care, everybody.